Hello, everybody. Cool. Yeah. Fantastic. Wow. Gosh. Okay, yes. Welcome to Time to Pull the Cosmic Trigger. What we want to know, Liverpool, is do we think it is time to pull the cosmic trigger again? And if so, do we have the necessary protections in place? What path should we follow in order to maximise the magic? And should we pull it right here in Liverpool in the pool of life itself? All right, we'll play along. Anyway, you're going to be the popes and popesses of the cosmic jury. We're going to present some evidence to you here tonight. And based on what you conclude, we will decide whether we will indeed be pulling the cosmic trigger this year, November 23rd. But I guess there's a chance that a few of you here don't even know what a cosmic trigger is. So we better catch you lot up, haven't we? Now, there's a few answers to that one, and I imagine there's a few experts in amongst you, so I'll ask around. But for the sake of this evening, what you need to know is this. Cosmic Trigger is a book. It's an autobiographical account of Robert Anton Wilson, or Pope Bob. Robert Anton Wilson is probably best known for co-authoring the comic science fiction epic Illuminatus. And Illuminatus is probably best known in this city, at least, as being the greatest show ever staged on planet World, as adapted and directed by my late father, Ken Campbell. And it was staged at the Liverpool School of Language, Music, Dream and Pun, which is now Flanagan's Apple. Actually, the most succinct description I've come across of Illuminatus recently is by Angie Salmons in the great write-up she did for Liverpool Confidential recently. You in, Angie? Yeah. Anyway, thanks for that, wherever you are. Yeah, she wrote this. This is about Illuminatus. A magnum opus by two Playboy writers, which in a nutshell took the piss. By using psychology, quantum physics, and conspiracy theory, the Illuminatus trilogy demonstrated just how arbitrary and untrustworthy our beliefs really are. In fact, this was one of Robert Anton Wilson's big projects. He sometimes referred to it as guerrilla ontology, or let's really challenge all our beliefs 100%. And it actually puts me in mind of this is the original policy statement of the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. Science fiction is the discipline of thinking sideways and thus jerks the mind awake with unexpected syntheses. Take an example from geology, cross-fertilize it with a concept from psychology, add a dash of genetic engineering and see what all that has to do with Aztec pyramids. Science fiction takes nothing for granted. It examines concepts old and new with the innocent curiosity of a child or a Martian. Even the familiar, when seen from the outside, is made fresh. Science fiction moves with equal aplomb towards either sense or nonsense, and in so doing, often makes us question which is which. I like that's a good policy statement for the science fiction theatre. Anyway, right, let's catch up the stragglers. So, in the last talk I did, I told the story of how I was stood looking up at the Jung bust, which is on Matthew Street, just up the way. And this was really soon after my father, Ken Campbell's, sudden and untimely death. There'd been a memorial gig done here, actually, and a few of us had gone along to the Jung bust to pay our respects there. And I realised that right at that moment that I was looking up at the Jung bust, I was actually in the middle of writing an essay about Carl Jung for this course that I was doing. And then it occurred to me, well, hang on a minute, even though it's a distance course, the course is actually based at John Moores University in Liverpool, at which point I discovered that John Moores had actually known my paternal grandfather. John Moores had asked my paternal grandfather if he wanted to get involved in this business venture, and he turned him down. It turned out to be the football pools, right? And, anyway, so I realised, my God, I'm looking at this bust of Jung. I'm writing an essay about Jung, and I'm studying at a university built with money which could have been mine were it not for the lack of business acumen of my paternal grandfather. And at that moment, my mother, who was stood next to me, says, "And you do know that you were conceived in that building right there?" I said, "What, are you sure?" She said, "Oh yes, it was an 18-hour production, you know. There were some dull bits." So it was at that moment that I realised how thoroughly embroiled I was in this ever-thickening mythos and I saw why my parents had seen fit to give me the middle name Eris. I also told how, aged 23, I finally got around to reading Illuminatus, and then I overdosed on the cosmic juice, and I ended up in a loony bin with rainbow knickers on my head. And I told how 5 years after my father's death and 10 years after the rainbow knickers, 2 people phoned me unbeknownst to each other and asked me if it was time that we did Illuminatus again. Anyway, listen, while we're talking about Illuminatus, it would be fun to see what Alan Moore has to say about his discovery of Illuminatus. This is one of the most extraordinary treats that's come about since the beginning of manifesting this whole thing, is that I got invited by John Higgs, who's going to talk in a bit, to go and meet with Alan Moore. And man, he can talk! My God, he held forth for 5.5 hours. Without pausing for breath. We managed to capture a few bits of it on video, so we'll weave a few bits of that through this evening as well. But yeah, my God, he's a marathon monologuist. In fact, it was a little bit like being with my dad again, except with a lot more hair. So popes and popesses of the cosmic jury, Alan Moore.
I think Steve Moore was up and visiting and gave me a copy of the Illuminatus trilogy. And up until that point, I suppose that although I'd been interested in occultism as a source of ideas that I could make use of in fantasy stories, I hadn't really been interested in it as a phenomenon in itself, because an awful lot of the people connected with occultism from a kind of an ordinary perspective, they did seem to be perhaps emotionally lacking in some way, that they had got some kind of emotional hole that they were trying to fill with ideas of a secret power, a secret knowledge, something that made them special. It didn't seem a very pleasant environment or a very illuminating environment to me, until I read the Illuminatus trilogy, and I saw how all of this could be made into a fantastic, enlightening joke, an enlightening game, that what was previously paranoia or illness could suddenly be transformed into a really instructive way of looking at the world. It was a rational way of approaching occultism, which appealed to me immensely, and is probably a cornerstone of my later involvement with the occult. I think that the people who actually tend to think in terms of a global conspiracy, I think that in many ways that is because that is reassuring. When I was working upon the project Brought to Light, which was a history of the CIA since the end of the Second World War, when they were the OSS, up to, I believe, the Iran-Contra affair. And you find out that, yeah, there are complex conspiracies that are running all over the world, but most of the people running them are completely inept, are unbelievably stupid, that the plans that they come up with, they're pretty much like those CIA plans for killing Castro, which included exploding cigars, chemicals to make his beard fall out and thus take away his masculinity in the eyes of the Cuban people, and even a brilliant plan to restage the second coming of Jesus Christ in the Bay of Pigs by using amplification technology and fireworks, which the primitive superstitious Cuban people would clearly never have heard of, in order to make them think that Jesus Christ had come back and was really, really pissed off at Fidel Castro, hoping that they would defect. That never got off the ground either. These are the kind of conspiracies. So yes, there are things that are being run by shadowy powers from behind the scenes. But there are so many of those shadowy powers, and they are so divided against each other. They are all undermining each other. Nobody knows who they work for anymore. Even people in the intelligence services. They are not sure whether they're working for the country that they're supposed to be working for, or could they perhaps be an unwitting double agent for another country, or is it a triple agent? Once disinformation entered the picture, then it really did become a complete world of shadows where nobody knows what they're doing. The simple truth of the world is that it is far too complex to be contained by any conceivable conspiracy. I think that the frightening truth of the world is that there is no human hand upon the rudder, that the forces that are working their way out through human history are largely, it may be supposed, blind mathematical forces, that these are all just contingencies and permutations of existence itself, but that they do have very, very interesting and often meaningful patterns in amongst all of those perhaps chance events and occurrences. And that was the major benefit perhaps of Wilson's books, that he introduced me to that way of looking at the world.
Yeah, great, isn't it? Anyway, so I'd had these 2 phone calls from these two people in the same week. But you know, I remembered the rainbow knickers, and I remembered my dad's face anytime anyone ever mooted the possibility of doing Illuminatus again. And I thought, you know, no, I don't want to unleash all that again. But I didn't want to do an exact copy of one of my dad's capers. But these phone calls, you know, they did have the effect of sending me off to look for my old copy of Illuminatus, which I couldn't find that day. But what I did find was Cosmic Trigger. Here, and you know what, I was reminded, you got your marker there if you need it. I was reminded that, that this book is in fact dedicated to my dad and the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. And then, not only that, you guys can come and have a look in a minute, but on page 46, 2 times 23, you'll note, is my mother, right? That's my mum. And then on page 223, which happens, of course, to be the same page that Jung wrote about his dream of Liverpool in Memories, Dreams and Reflections. I'll let Oliver read it as this is Oliver Senton, who's going to be our Robert Anton Wilson tonight. Page 223, Oliver.
On November 23rd, 1976, Sacred Discordian Holy Day, both because of the 23 and because it is Harper Marx's birthday, a most ingenious young Englishman named Ken Campbell premiered a 10-hour adaptation of Illuminatus at the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool. It was something of a success. Campbell and his partner, actor Chris Langham, were invited to present it as the first production of the new Cottesloe extension of the National Theatre under the patronage of Her Majesty the Queen. This seemed to me the greatest Discordian joke ever. Since Illuminatus, as I may not have mentioned before, is the most overtly anarchistic novel of the century, Shea and I quite seriously defined our purpose when writing it as trying to do to the state what Voltaire did to the church, to reduce it to an object of contempt among all educated people. Ken Campbell's adaptation was totally faithful to this nihilistic spirit and contained long, unexpurgated speeches from the novel, explaining at sometimes tedious length just why everything governments do is always wrong. The audiences didn't mind this pedantic lecturing because it was well integrated into a kaleidoscope of humor, suspense, plenty of sex, more simulated blowjobs than any drama in history, I mean. The thought of having this subversive ritual staged under the patronage of H.M. the Queen Elizabeth II was nectar and ambrosia. The National Theatre flew Shea and me over to London for the premiere, and I fell in love with the whole cast, especially Prunella G., who emphatically has my vote for sexiest actress since Marilyn Monroe. Some of us did a lot of drinking and hash smoking together, and the cast told me a lot of synchronicities connected with the production. 5 actors were injured during the Liverpool run to fulfill the law of fives. Hitler had lived in Liverpool for 5 months when he was 23 years old. The section of Liverpool in which the play opened, indeed the very street, is described in a dream of Carl Jung's recorded on page 223 of Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections. The theater in Liverpool opened the day Jung died. There is a Yellow Submarine in Illuminatus, and the Beatles first sang Yellow Submarine in that same Liverpool theater. The actor playing Padre Pederastia in the Black Mass scene had met Aleister Crowley on a train once. The cast dared me to do a walk-on role during the National Theater run. I agreed and became an extra in the Black Mass, where I was upstaged by the goat who kept sneezing. Nonetheless, there I was, bare-ass naked, chanting, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," under the patronage of Elizabeth II, the Queen of England. And I will never stop wondering how much of that was programmed by Crowley before I was even born.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic. Oliver Centre. Yeah, it's fascinating. This cosmic trigger book, it sort of details what happened to Wilson kind of as he was writing Illuminatus and in the aftermath of it. He gets heavily into the teachings of Aleister Crowley, takes a lot of acid, cooks up plans for immortality and space migration with his pal, Timothy Leary, helps found the Church of Discordia, which worships Eris, the Greek goddess of chaos, discord, confusion, and international relations, before finding that he has stumbled upon a 6,500-year-old telepathic dialogue with the dog star Sirius. Yeah, it's terrific stuff. Should we hear a bit of Wilson just tell us about Cosmic Trigger from his point of view?
All right. Cosmic Trigger dealt with a process of deliberately induced brain change, through which I put myself in the years 1962 to 1976. This process is called initiation, or vision quest in many traditional societies, and can loosely be considered some dangerous variety of self-psychotherapy in modern terminology. Dr. John Lilly more resoundingly calls this induced brain change meta-programming the human biocomputer. In simple basic English, as a psychologist and a novelist, I set out to find how much rapid reorganization was possible in the brain functioning of one normal domesticated primate of average intelligence, the only one with whom I could ethically perform such risky research, myself. And like most people who have historically attempted such meta-programming, I soon found myself in metaphysical hot water. It became urgently obvious that my previous models and metaphors would not and could not account for what I was experiencing. I therefore had to create new models and metaphors as I went along.
Thank you. Yes, anyway, so the upshot of all this was that I decided to adapt Cosmic Trigger for the stage. And I've done it, pretty much. I've adapted it in such a way that, that we get Wilson's story, but then as he's writing Illuminatus, we can kind of slip into the pages of Illuminatus.
That's enough of that for now. Go and learn your lines. Bloody scripts on stage. I've got to talk to this filmmaker chap. What do you want to know then?
Really, I just want to know how you get involved in the whole production, Ken.
Well, I got a phone call from, oh, he's here actually, Liverpudlian poet chap, Peter Halligan, to say that he'd been reading Jung's Memories, Dreams and Reflections, and on page 223, well, Jung mentions his dream about Liverpool being the pool of life. There's a little fountain and whatnot. And Halligan made it his mission to go and find the exact spot. And he's ringing me to tell me that he's found it. It's on the corner of Matthew Street, just near the cavern where the Beatles first performed. And it turns out the building on the corner of this most holy spot is derelict. So Halligan claims it. He's put a cafe in the basement and he's calling me to see if I want to stick something on there. He's calling it the Liverpool School of Magic, Language, Music, Dream and Pun. So I head down to Compendium Bookshop, try and find some interesting things. I've got a couple of, things that are hanging around. And then I'll come across this book that's got a yellow submarine on the cover. Right, I'm going to test this. Young Streams on page 223 of Memory Streams and Reflections. So I'm going to look at page 223 of this Yellow Submarine book, and if interesting, I'll stick on an adaptation of that. So I turn to page 223, and we'll read it to you. Daisy, yeah, can you grab that copy? Right, read out page 223.
Okay, page 223 is Robert Putney Drake, and he says, do you know what Jung, that old Chinese sage disguised as a psychiatrist, said? He said, you are diving, but she is sinking.
Yeah. Well, that set me back in my tracks. So I ring up Peter Halligan and I say, Pete, I've got the show for you. It's called Illuminatus. And so, here we are in this derelict warehouse in Liverpool. The first thing the cast had to do was put in the toilets.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks, Ken.
And how did you come to be making a film about us in your cardigan?
I heard about it from a friend back in London,
Oh. Yeah, who?
Brian Gilbert.
Now that Burke. Yes?
Yes, and I then applied to the Arts Council, and naturally I got given the go-ahead.
You got Arts Council funding.
Well, yeah.
They wouldn't fund the greatest show on planet World, and they give Arts Council funding to some prick who hears about it from his Berkey mate in the pub. Oh, you think I'm joking? I'm not joking. Do you know what funded is? Funded! Yeah, you and your Arts Council funded camera sucking the creativity out of true geniuses. Funded! Oh, conspiracy of mediocrity! You can fuck off back to London and tell Berkey Brian not to send any more pillocks to Liverpool!
Very good, Ken. Why don't you carry up your own arse?
Yeah, I will. I'll carry right up my own arsehole and I'll find the secret of the great cosmic joke up there, and you can beg for Arts Council funding to come up and have a look! All right. Back to Daisy. Don't make an arse of yourself.
Okay, yes. So, that brought back memories. Yeah. So it was at about this point, we were just about to have the first read-through of the first draft, and I got a call from my mum, and she says, I've just had this guy called John Higgs pop round to get pictures of me dressed up as Eris for this book he's written, and you've got to get in touch with him. Anyway, it turns out that John Higgs has written this book about the KLF and all the forces that led to them kind of burning their £1 million, and it includes my dad and Illuminatus and Robert Anton Wilson, all these things. And not only that, he lives in Brighton, where I live. We've got kids the same age. We both go on holiday in North Wales. I mean, we are practically cosmic twins. Anyway, so we met up, and then I read his book, and I tell you what, guys, it's required reading, this book. If you want to help us to pull the cosmic trigger, you've got to read John's book, KLF, Chaos Magic, and the Band Who Burned £1 million. And it gives me great pleasure to invite John to come and speak. You here, John?
Yeah.
Yeah,
here.
fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, John Higgs.
Hello. Hello. Yeah. Well, my name is John Higgs. I wrote. I wrote a book about the KLF. Maybe it's about the KLF. Maybe it's a gateway drug. I don't know. But we'll say it's about the KLF because people of my generation, they know that band very well. The younger generation, maybe not. When the band split up, they deleted their entire back catalogue in an effort to remove themselves from musical history. And this is why, after 20 years of their music not being available to the corporate music industry, you don't hear them in adverts or film soundtracks or Ministry of Sound compilations or things like that. And that's quite surprising when you consider just how massive they were. I mean, in 1991, they were the best-selling singles band in the entire world. Or how influential, just this month, the Times, of all things, the Times, said they were the second best band in all of history after the Beatles. And they very nearly managed to delete themselves completely from, mainstream awareness. And I think one of the reasons they never quite managed that is because when they split up, Bill Drummond and Jimmy Cauty, they took all the money they'd earned from the music industry, £1 million, and they flew up to the Hebrides, and on the after midnight, on August the 23rd, 1994, they went to a deserted boathouse in the middle of nowhere, and they set fire to the lot. And they were at just as much a loss as everyone else to explain why they did that. They just didn't know. People said, is it art? Is it a prank? Is it a political thing? It didn't seem to be any of those. It was a compulsion. They just felt it was something they had to do. And that compulsion was so strong, they acted on it. And starting to set fire to £1 million is one thing. But finishing burning £1 million is entirely other. And an act like that, it's hard to forget. I heard about it 20 years ago, it stuck in my craw. And it wasn't that I didn't have a rational explanation for what they did. I wasn't so naive to think there'd be a rational explanation for it. I didn't even have an irrational one to process it. Or at least I didn't until I read a book called From Hell by Alan Moore and Edie Campbell, which sort of led me into the philosophy of Alan Moore, for want of a better phrase. And Alan Moore's philosophy is, I think, the only one, it's certainly the only one I'm aware of, that can contain an act like that. So with that key, I was then able to go on and write this book. And as I say, it's not a normal music book, and it's not really a book about the KLF, if I'm being totally honest. It's a book about 5 separate threads, all of which are rational enough by themselves, but when you put them together, and they do seem to have a peculiar attraction to each other, when you combine them, a whole new story suddenly emerges that is arguably larger than the sum of all its parts. And every one of those 5 threads is either indelibly linked to Liverpool, or I first came across it when I was living in Liverpool back in 89, 94. So if it wasn't for this city, this book wouldn't exist. And those 5 threads are Robert Anton Wilson, of course, and Alan Moore, who were both writers that I first discovered when I moved to Liverpool. I'm originally from a place called Buckley in North Wales, which is about 23 miles outside of here, of course. Robert Anton Wilson hadn't made it to Buckley, but I moved to Liverpool and you guys knew about him, so I got him and I got Alan Moore. The third thread, surprisingly, was the great British folk myth of our age, Doctor Who. And for me, Doctor Who is Tom Baker, and Tom Baker is from Liverpool. You could have Paul McGann as well, but Tom Baker. And the other 2 threads are Bill Drummond, of course, and Ken Campbell, who, as you all are well aware, both worked on this legendary 1977 production of Illuminatus, which we're still feeling the ripples of to this day. And what I like about this book, excuse me, what I like about this book is I can never quite tell how people are going to react to it. One example, a friend of mine, a writer, a painter, an artist, he read the book and he said, yeah, I'm inspired, I'm going to do a painting. And I sort of wondered what happened, the whole thing, what was the thing that jumped out of him? And he said, I'm going to do a painting of Bill Drummond and Julian Cope in Matthew Street, kicking the living crap out of each other. And this isn't something that's in the book, I should explain, before I accidentally start an urban legend. This isn't something that actually happened. Say what you like about Bill Drummond, but I don't think anyone would say he's a violent man. And, well, Julian Cope's very into guns and things these days, and male power imagery, and things like that. But I don't think a straight, fair, one-on-one fight in the street with Bill Drummond is his scene either, so it's not something that happened. But the idea of it, I thought was quite interesting, because for me it helps to illustrate one of the core themes in Cosmic Trigger. Because this painting was going to be set at the place Daisy's been talking about, the end of Matthew Street. Beneath the bust of Young and on top of a manhole cover that lies there. Because it's a place obviously it's meaningful to Daisy, but it's also a place that's meaningful for, say, Bill Drummond. And we know that because last year, in April, for his 60th birthday, Bill Drummond came back to Liverpool and he stood on this manhole cover in Matthew Street for 17 hours. And he did that to mark the end of a musical project of his called The 17. And he did it wearing this long leather overcoat, which I think was the same one he wore at the final KLF performance at the Brit Awards when he had the machine gun and they left a dead sheep on the steps of the venue, and which he has said was the overcoat worn by Martin Bormann, Hitler's right-hand man, when he escaped to South America. Assuming that's what happened, historians are slightly divided on that subject. But it's a serious coat for him, and it seems in some way to be linked to ending of projects, or ending of musical things, or ending of the Third Reich, or whatever. And the reason he stood on the manhole cover, I'm sure most of you know, but just quickly for those who don't, it was this dream that Carl Jung had, that Daisy was talking about earlier. In 1927, Carl Jung was going through a bit of a bad patch. He was in quite a dark place. And then he had a dream set in Liverpool, which is a place he'd never been to. And it was a place, a square where all these roads met. And it was grey, it was raining, it was miserable and depressing, except for this little island in the centre of the square, where there was this magnolia tree. And this magnolia tree was as if lit by the heavens, where as well as being in light, it was sort of the source of light at the same time. And the sight of this tree was so beautiful that even the image of it in a dream was enough to completely turn Jung's life around and give him a sense of purpose and give him the confidence to split with Freud and to go on and do all the work that he's most famous for. And so this is why he said Liverpool is the pool of life, because this was an image of the life force, essentially. And there was a spring in Matthew Street, which is the place that's now traditionally linked with Jung's dream. And so this is why Bill Drummond came to the manhole cover, because for him it represented the skin, I guess, between our world, the physical, practical world, and the internal world of the immaterial and the imagination and the creativity. And an artist like Bill Drummond, that's very important. But it's also a place that's important to Julian Cope as well, because he came here in October 2008. He was doing a busking tour around the UK, and he was visiting places that were personally meaningful to him, either politically or revolutionary or artistically. And places like Emmeline Pankhurst's statue or the site of the Peterloo Massacre, places like that. And he ended it under the statue of Carl Jung. And he busked underneath it wearing his little Luftwaffe cap that he wears. And he did an old Teardrop Explode songs that used to play down in Eric's down the street back in the day. And he did a song called Mighty Carl Jung. Now, Julian Cope's philosophy is very different to Bill Drummond's. Bill Drummond thinks that recorded music was something of the 20th century, and that's irrelevant now in the 21st century. Julian Cope's still recording, he's in about 50 albums. Julian Cope says things like, never fall for the art trip. And for Bill Drummond, the art trip is everything. So they're very different people. Yet this place is still meaningful to Julian Cope for strange little coincidences. For instance, the stone, the plinth of the statue comes from where was it? It was a quarry in Bollington in Switzerland for reasons that are symbolic with Jung's life. And they were brought over, this stone was driven over from Switzerland to Liverpool by a guy who took, I think is perhaps the most influential and important picture of Julian Cope, which is the cover of Fried, where he's under a turtle shell. This is the mid-80s, but he was under a turtle shell. This is a guy called Donato Ciniccioli III. And he brought the stone over in an obscure, strange little car called an Isabella Coupe, which was from a German company called Borgwald, who went bust in the early 60s. So these things are rare. But Cope had one, and his wife grew up with one. And so for various complicated things in his own mythology, this place was important. So this one place is important and meaningful to Daisy, to Julian Cope, to Bill Drummond, for entirely different reasons. And that's kind of fitting if you look at Jung's dream. Because Jung's dream wasn't a vision of the great truth or anything like that, anything specific. It was just an affirmation that meaning did exist. It didn't define it in any way. It just stated that meaning existed per se. Now, in another book of mine, which is The First Church on the Moon, which is set in the future, and they have a future Bible. And in the future Bible, it says something like, if you apply meaning to what you're doing, you have art. If you apply meaning to a person, you have love. If you apply meaning to everything, you have God. Meaning is free. There's an inexhaustible supply of meaning. So what's your fucking problem? And of course, the problem is meaning is not fixed, it's not static. It sort of comes and goes like the tide, it ebbs and flows. There are times when your life is drenched in meaning and everything is rich and rewarding and pleasurable. And there are times when the tide has gone out and you have the horrors, the existential horrors of Sartre or Samuel Beckett or something like that. And it's at times like that that Jung's vision is so valuable, because it's a reminder that meaning itself does actually exist. And this is sort of what Cosmic Trigger's about. And although the main metaphor in Cosmic Trigger is more brutal, is more violent, the gun, than this fountain, this tree, this unending source that Jung saw, it's still the source of meaning. And to pull the cosmic trigger means to be hit by a tsunami of meaning, which you then have to make sense of, because you pulled the trigger. And for Robert Anton Wilson, that tsunami of meaning that hit him was coloured by things like invisible giant rabbits and aliens from Sirius and Illuminati and acid and Aleister Crowley and things like that. But he would never for 1 minute think that that's what you would get if you pulled the cosmic trigger. The fact that his personal vision was just that, a personal vision, did not belittle it in any way for him, because it was still the most interesting and useful and funny philosophy that he ever came across. And everyone's personal meaning is just the same, and it doesn't alter it once you know that it's just a blossom on the great tree rather than the whole of the great tree itself. Now, we've got a bit more from Alan Moore, greatest living Englishman, and he talks about a time in his life, which was again the early 90s, this period of KLF, where he had a vision that affected him to the same degree that Jung's dream affected him and turned his life around. And rather nicely, it also includes a white room, because at that time, the early 90s, there was this rush of colour-coded conceptual spaces. There was the KLF's white room, there was Orwell's blue room, there was David Lynch's red room. It was all very patriotic, all these things. And in the white room, he talks about, it was Robert Anton Wilson, which is rather wonderful. So I'd just like to thank you all for coming. Thank you for listening. I also thank News from Nowhere, who've come to sell books. They've got some great Alan Moore, they've got some great Robert Anton Wilson. I'll be signing KLF and Break and things like that. Ali Fruish, if you're here, thank you so much for setting up everything with Alan. It's much appreciated. And I will leave you with more Alan Moore. Thank you very much.
at the end of 1993, when I turned 40 and decided at my birthday party, after I'd had a few drinks, that I was going to become a magician for the remainder of my life. And I actually announced that. I said it out loud. Other people could hear it too. And thus, the next morning, yeah, I was quite hungover, and you think, oh Christ, what did I say? Now I'm going to have to do that, or I'm going to look stupid. So I had to find out, all right, what do I even mean by magician? How do you do this? Who do I get in touch with? And I naturally got in touch with Steve Moore, who'd been involved with that kind of thing for a few years. And we talked theoretically about the kind of magic that we might want to do. This was all theory. This was at the end of 1993, the very beginning of 1994. And we were relaxing using some psilocybin mushrooms, which were just taken for entertainment purposes. And we were discussing what we might like to do with magic. It was entirely theoretical. I think Steve was suggesting that we could use a cut-up technique because we wanted to try and come up with some new way of approaching magic. And we thought that a literary approach, by using modern literary techniques, such as Burroughs' cut-up technique, that might be an interesting way. And Steve was suggesting that we could perhaps take a piece of purposive magic, a piece of text saying what we wanted, and that we could take another piece of text representing the body of the god, and that by cutting these up and intersplicing them, we could perhaps in some way conceptually unite what we wanted with the idea of the god. See what results that might have. Now, because I was starting to come up on the psilocybin mushrooms, I was completely incapable of understanding this. So, but I thought I had understood it. I thought that Steve was suggesting we should take a piece of text representing a god and a piece of text representing a goddess, and that we should intercut those and splice them together. And so I excitedly said, yeah, that's a great idea. So what we should do is, and I ran through my theory, and Steve said, yeah, that's great, but that's not what I was saying. He ran through his again. I completely misunderstood it again, went through my pitch about fusing the god and the goddess. This happened 3 times before Steve said, Alan, we've been through this 3 times already. At which point, there was a sudden realisation, I think, that I said, I don't think this is the drugs. And at that point, probably one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, at least to that point, commenced, which was a magical experience. I really don't know any other way to describe it. Luckily, both of us were there. So it was at least a shared delusion. We had other reference points. We had the reference point of another person to evaluate the experience, which is more than most people get. During this very, very strange and multi-leveled experience, which went on for a number of hours, there was one point where we suddenly perceived that we had blundered into a blinding white space, a room of complete dazzling white, in which were presences of great magicians. William Blake was there, Aleister Crowley was there, John Dee, Zhuge Liang, Austin Spare, Edward Kelly, there was an impression of figures at the back with animal heads. Not sure what they were, Egyptian gods, something like that, don't know. But amongst this crowd of dead Magi, there was also Robert Anton Wilson, who at that point was alive. Although I believe that it was only a couple of months thereafter where he would be reported dead and would have to go to great pains to explain that reports of his death had been greatly exaggerated. Don't know whether that's connected, but at the time, I remember after the experience had concluded, where basically I think we both became a bit embarrassed to be in the company of such transcendent beings when we were giggling and perhaps not conducting ourselves in the most sort of Magus-like manner, you know. But afterwards, I remember thinking that was the Illuminati. That was the real Illuminati, which in the Western magical tradition, there is alleged to be a group of adepts who are outside time, who are nevertheless benign in their feelings towards the those magicians working upon a terrestrial level, and who will intervene and offer help to aspiring magicians. This is part of the kind of the folklore of magic, if you like. In the Sufi tradition, in the Western tradition, that group of sort of transmaterial adepts are known as the Illuminati. In the Sufi tradition, I believe they're known as the Powerhouse. On the Kabbalistic glyph, the Tree of Life, I believe they are associated with the female sphere Binah, which is the third sphere of the Kabbalah. It's kind of the female head of God. And that is where they are supposed to be situated. I've got no idea whether any of this relates to the vision that Steve and I had, but we did think that Wilson's inclusion amongst the dead Magi, that kind of makes sense in an eternalist view of time, where, in a sense, we're all already dead, and we're looking back upon this. Or this is another replay of something that has already happened many times before. That would explain how, we're always with the Illuminati, whether we're alive or dead, that the future, the past, that really doesn't matter. That this is, at least conceptually, a kind of a cream of human intellect and spirituality outside time that can sometimes be called upon and resorted to.
Pull it,